Franco's presentation was a good segue into mine because I'm going to give you, hopefully, the antidote to entitlement, which is accountability. And how do you foster an accountable culture? First of all, I need to say, I am used to spending I have a 2-day leadership course, I have a 5-day leadership course, so now I have 45 minutes. I can really relate to Mark's 600 seconds. I can relate to this because I can tell you that I'm reminded of the words of Elizabeth Taylor to her 8th husband on their wedding day. She turned to her 8th husband and said, "Don't worry, dear, I won't keep you long." So I won't keep you long today, but I will promise, folks, to keep you engaged. We have a very short amount of time. My hope and promise in the next 3/4 of an hour is that I want to shift your thinking about what we mean by accountability. It's one of the most misunderstood words in organization today. We talk about kids need to be accountable, parents need to be accountable, politicians need to be accountable. We talk about it, folks, as if we understand what we're talking about, and we don't. So I want to bring some clarity around that. First of all, let me tell you, how many of you understand you should never be so busy doing that you don't have time to think about what you're doing? So today is about stepping back, reflecting, and finding out what really matters in our life. Franco started that process after Mark started this process. So just to give you a broad cross-section of the companies that we've worked with, just to tell you a little bit about me. Our firm works with organizational cultures. And what we do is that we go in and we help companies define what kind of culture they want to have. What kind of environment do we want to create here? What's our way of doing business? What do we want to have people describe our customers as being? And then we develop these nice fancy value statements. How many of you understand there's a difference between values and value statements? How many of you have ever seen a set of values on the wall? Statements on the wall that weren't real values. Ever been in a hotel with a mission statement that says we put customers first? And then you talk to the clerk and you wonder, did this person read the mission statement? Because we got the statement, but we didn't get the mission. We got the value statements, but we didn't get the value. So what we do is that we go in and we work with organizations to help get those value statements off the wall and into people's action. Now, you know where I learned how to do this? Is working with families. Because my first degree was actually in early childhood education. Then I went back and got a graduate degree in social work, opened up my own practice in Lethbridge in 1982 as a family therapist. Very interesting when you're a family therapist, nobody ever brings in their good kids, right? So all I saw, day after day after day, year after year after year, were people in pain. And I thought, there's got to be a better way to do this. At the same time, I got a call from a lawyer, and he's sitting in a kitchen of a farm family in southern Alberta. And he said, I got hired, this is what the conversation was, I got hired to work with this family on a succession, on managing the transition from the parents to the next generation. But they don't need a lawyer. They need a therapist because they're not talking to each other. Would you come? I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea about business. I had no idea about families in business. What I did know is families. And I went in there and I learned about this whole process, and I observed and I watched. What I learned is one thing. I've heard several things, but I'll tell you one thing I learned. When kids come in to a succession process with a sense of entitlement, it doesn't work. So I used to tell parents in those days, do your kids have a right to this farm? Let me ask you, do your kids have a right to your business? The key answer from my perspective is no. Key is, when do you tell them that? When you bring them home from the hospital. I just want you to know you have no right to this place unless I deem it so. So these are the experiences that I had. And what I used to do is I really talked about how do we create a culture of accountability? And how do we create an alignment around our values to actually live with some of the things that Franco was talking about? I'm going to give you 4 questions that assess accountability. By the way, I don't have a set of handouts. All you need to do is email me. Come up afterwards. I'll give you my card. Email me and I'll send you these slides. And we can make these slides available for everybody, hey, in the room. So here's 4 questions that assess the level of accountability within your family. And you can apply this, by the way, you can apply it to your home. By the way, my daughters, one of the things I love to do is to involve my kids in the business. And whenever I can, I bring them to hear me speak, and I say, providing that you write a paper on what you learned and take it back to your teacher. You got to sit in on what I'm saying. And just a little sidebar here, my 18-year-old came to hear me speak last year. We're flying home from Newfoundland. And I said, give me some feedback. It's very interesting. Bring one of your kids to work, right? And give me some feedback. She said, Dad, I think you should practice what you preach. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, I'm 18 years old. We've lived in this family. You said to this group of executives that a family is a culture, just like an organization is a culture, that you can't not live in a culture. You can't not live in a culture. So she said, I've lived here for 18 years. I don't know what our values are. And I said, well, we have values. We just don't have value statements. She says, okay, I'll buy that. She said, then tell me your process. Tell me what our process is to actually live our values, to hold ourselves accountable for living our values. So you know what? She got me. So she got promoted to vice president of culture in our family. And we worked for 6 months in developing a set of values. And guess what we spend time talking about? Just like I learned from WestJet. Whenever they have a meeting, they have a culture moment. And they have a kudos committee. Do you know that WestJet has a kudos committee? 4 people. Their full-time job is to fly around WestJet and catch people living the values. Catch employees living the values. And when they find them living the values, they send an email to everybody, all 9,000 employees, and tell the story. And they start every meeting with a value story. Now, has that process of defining our values in our family created a better culture? I'm going to suggest it's taken a great culture up a notch. Because guess what we talk about now? Instead of asking the kids what they learned in school today and you get nothing, what we say is, where did we live our values today? And every 3 months, my kids sit down and do a report card on their dad, on how I'm doing about living the values in our family. And they love it. So it's taken us up a notch. So let me give you 4 quick questions to assess, no matter what culture you're defining. Could be your firm, if you're an advisor, could be your family business, could be your family. What is your process for managing expectations in your organization? Now, I'm not here to challenge, I'm here to challenge. I'm not here to criticize. I'm here to just simply ask the Dr. Phil question. You know what the Dr. Phil question is? How's that working for you? How would you describe your process? We all work together. We all have expectations. What's your process for managing those expectations? So here's a few questions. Is there ease or tension in those relationships? Relationships that are accountable have ease to them. It flows. We know what our accountabilities are and it flows. Versus tension. Tension is an indication we're not yet good at our accountabilities. Are people clear about what's expected? Nothing stresses people out when they're not clear about if they're not clear about what's expected. People feel supported. And do people follow through on what they say they're going to do? We're going to learn in a second here what accountability is. It's about keeping your promises. How passionate and engaged are people in their work? My dad taught me something really important. And by the way, I haven't talked to Cafe for a long time. I did a seminar in January with you. But this goes back to my roots, so I really appreciate being able to contribute. But I got to tell you, I can't talk about accountability without talking about my parents. How many of you had parents that lived through the Second World War? You were raised by parents who taught you about things like duty, initiative, maturity. Those values that are deeply ingrained in us. We don't want to go back to the good old days. They weren't the good old days, but we do want to take the good from the old days. And here's what my dad taught me about passion. I can't talk, by the way, let me ask you, where were the seeds of accountability first planted in you? My dad was the Canadian gymnastics champion back in the 1940s. He used to walk around the house on his hands when he was 60 years old. There's my favorite picture. That's on top of Mount Yamnuska, just outside Banff National Park. Now, he helped me understand one thing about accountability, as I recall. If you got an accountability problem, it's not an accountability problem. It's a passion problem. Because if you find your passion in life, you'll be naturally more accountable. But if you're not accountable, you don't have enough reasons to be accountable. So my dad would take me down to the gym with his passion every Saturday morning and try to turn me into a gymnast. Because he wanted what he had. Now, when you're in elementary school, if you've ever been on parallel bars, they're this big. And I'd never in 3 years developed the strength to lift myself up on those parallel bars. And my dad finally gave up on his dream. But he didn't give up on helping me find my passion. What he discovered when I was in junior high is that I had a passion to run. He knew nothing about running, but he got me the books. He bought me a book by Roger Bannister on the first 4-minute mile. Got me a book by Bill Bowerman, who revolutionized track in the 1960s and 70s in the States, later started a little company called Nike. I got one of his first books on his philosophy of track. And then he got me all the miles measured outside of our little acreage outside of north of Red Deer. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, he would get me out of bed. Now, my alarm clock would go off. If I didn't get out of bed in 5 minutes, my dad would be in my room on his hands. It's really hard to argue with the guy on his hands. And he would walk along the bed on his hands, and then he would flip around, grab my feet, and proceed to give me a lecture. I used to call them lectures in those days. After I had kids, I call them teaching opportunities. And he would give me a lecture. I can still hear my dad's lecture in my head 40 years later. Here's what he said to me. He said, "David," by the way, then you know you've had a leader in your life. "You are not going to build accountability with people unless you have a connection. All you build is resentment." And I'm getting ahead of myself, but you don't give without a connection. I don't think the problem is that we overgive to kids. I don't think so. What we do is that we overgive without the connection. We think that the giving of the materials is going to make the connection. We buy our relationships. That becomes the problem. And, as Franco so eloquently said, then we also try to make them happy and take responsibility for their happiness. At any rate, my dad would give me a lecture, and here's what he said. He said, "The purpose of having a dream, David, is not to achieve your dream. The purpose of having a dream is to inspire yourself to become the kind of person that it takes to achieve your dream." He said, "Very few people will ever make the Olympics, and even fewer will ever stand on the podium. But let me tell you, young man, any person can become the kind of person that it takes to get to the Olympics. And if you're going to become the kind of person that it takes to get to the Olympics as you have a dream to make the 1980 Olympic team, you need to declare your independence, young man, from two things. Number one, I'm warm bed now. Get up. If you can't put your feet on the floor in the morning, whether you feel like it or not, you will never make it the kind of person that it takes to get to the Olympics." Then I'd be heading out the door. It'd be 30 below. I couldn't see the end of our driveway. I'd be heading back to bed. My dad'd be standing by my bedroom at this point. He said, "The second thing you better declare your independence from? The weather. There's no such thing as bad weather. There's only bad clothes. Now go out and get a run in. You feel a whole lot better about yourself." I don't know how in this day and age to develop mental toughness in an age where we get so much given to us without that connection. It's a challenge. What's your level of undeserved entitlement in your family? There's the third question to reflect on. Let me tell you about my mother, what I learned from my mother. My mother lived in this shack 6 miles outside of Lethbridge in 1920s. Best we can figure out, it's about a 1930-31 photo. 12 kids lived in this 900 square foot shack. I remember asking one of my aunts, what was it like to be raised with 11 siblings in a 900 square foot, one bedroom home? You know, she said, "Well, we didn't have to go to school to learn about sex education. We got it all at home." Let me tell you, there isn't 1 ounce of entitlement in my mom's bones. She felt grateful for everything. There were days that all she did was live on potatoes. That's what they ate for days. How do we do this? Now, I have no idea who lives in this house. It's a movie star house. I Googled large mansions. But you tell me the challenge today of building accountability with kids who get raised in that house. One of the biggest challenges for me. I always tell is how do I raise accountable kids in an age of affluence? We've never had more opportunities. But how do you develop that toughness? Let me give you some of my thoughts. I don't know if I have the answers, but we got to struggle with it. Just like Franco said, I decided I want to be a millionaire when I grow up. Well, you have to work pretty hard to get $1 million. No, I won't. You will. I just want to inherit it. My mother, when she died, by the way, what would you rather get from your parents? A rich financial inheritance with no character and values? Or character and values and no money? You see, what I got was the character and the values. My mom died broke. She spent all my inheritance. My dad died in 1986. My mom died in 1999. I got nothing financially. But I got their values. Because you see, with values, you can create wealth and much, much more. So when my mom died, she left in her will 3 things to me. I always tell people, let your kids read the will. People say, well, we'll deal with it after we die. You want to find out what goes on in your family? Try dying. But I'll tell you, my mother left 3 things in her will. To my son David, she said, I leave my passion for learning. I got her library. And all of her library books that were written, some of them were written by Nellie McClung back in 1930. I have a book in my bookshelf by Nellie McClung, copyright 1930. Women of true character, men of true character. Number 2 I got from my mother, her 1902 Heinzmann piano. I got her piano. And with that piano comes my love for music. Please pass that on to your kids. I had an old farmer tell me once, you know how you can tell when you've passed your values on to your kids? When your grandkids teach you the values that you taught your kids. Number 3 I got from my mother, her quote book. My books are filled with her quotes, and in her quote book, she had a definition of maturity. Number 1, the ability to do a job, whether or not you're supervised. Number 2, finish a job once you start it. Number 3, carry money without spending it. Well, 2 out of 3 isn't bad, eh? And number 4, be able to bear an injustice without wanting to get even. How's that for a definition of maturity? Number 4, what's your level of tolerance for mediocrity? Colin Powell said this, everyone on a team knows who is not performing, and they're looking to you as the leader to see what you're going to do about it. We do an injustice to our family members when we forget this principle. Treat your family as a family and your employees as employees. Don't mix them. When they're an employee, they need to be treated as an employee. And one of the things that I've seen is we feel sorry for, we're going to make it soft because you're a family member. We don't do justice. So, my agenda in the next, you're going to tell me when I got to quit here because I can go all day. I'm going to answer 3 questions. Number 1, what is accountability? Why should you care? And how do you foster it? Okay, so number 1, what is accountability? Our definition is it's the ability to be counted on. Now, it's not rocket science, but it's inspiring to people who are accountable. Here's what I would ask you to do. If we had a little time today, make a list of everybody in your life you can count on. Unequivocally, if they say they'll do it, foster it. You build accountability in a culture a lot more with a flashlight than you do with a stick. When you shine a light on accountable action, you foster it. If I ask you, though, to those who you serve to do this assignment, would you be on their list? Whose list have you earned the right to be on? Here's what I've learned about accountability. It's a lot easier to see a lack of accountability in other people than it is in ourselves. It's a lot easier to go to the dentist and the dentist is 20 minutes late for her appointment. It's a lot easier to be frustrated with the dentist, right? Because they're late, they didn't keep their promise, than it is to be frustrated with ourselves. Hey, when have we kept people waiting? When have we not honored a promise? Lead by example. Why should you care about accountability? Well, first of all, we wrote this book very strategically. See this bridge of trust? You're in the business of trust. That's the goodwill you were talking about. You're in the business of trust. The keystone on that bridge is what? Accountability. With no accountability, you have no trust. Accountability is, to a person, what roots are to a tree. It's what's underneath the soil. The world doesn't necessarily see it, but you get the fruits of that. I understand there are bamboo trees in China that grow 1 inch in 4 years. And on the 5th year, they grow 100 feet. What are they doing for 4 years? They're developing the roots. If you're going to go high in terms of success, in terms of financial wealth, creating all this wealth, you better at the same time go deep in terms of developing that sense of accountability. As Henry Ford said, you can't build a reputation on what you're going to do. Okay? Now, how do you do it? That's what we really want to focus on. How do you cultivate accountability? I come back to my parents, and I want to talk about what they did. First of all, we grew up in a family where my parents always talked about rights, but they always balanced those rights with what? Every right, they used to say, nothing wrong with human rights, but every right needs to be balanced with an accountability. So as a teenager, we actually sat down and drafted a Charter of Rights in our family. It's a very interesting exercise. Now, the kids came up with the left-hand list. The parents came up with the right-hand list. Because every one of those rights was accompanied by an accountability. So let me just give you a quick sample. The right to say what you feel, to disagree, and to offer your opinion. Do so respectfully, and then get your chores done. Number 2, decide your own bedtime. We grew up in a family where we didn't have rules, we had principles. So we could go to bed whenever we wanted, as long as what? We kept the accountability, which is you get up at 6 o'clock, get your chores done, don't complain about being tired. Designer clothes. What do you suppose in your wildest imagination was the accompanying accountability on that one? I will never forget a 16-year-old sitting in my office as a therapist, turn to her dad and say, "It's my right, Dad, to $95 Calvin Klein jeans." Dad turned to her and said this, "Kid, I just want you to understand, as a father, it's my job to cover your rear end, not decorate it. I will give you $20 for a pair of Levi's. After that, you're on your own." Clean clothes. That's when my mother woke up. What do you mean you have a right to clean clothes? She grabbed me by the ear, hauled me into the laundry room. She said, "Are you tall enough to turn this washing machine on?" The day that I was tall enough to turn the washing machine on, my mother stopped washing clothes. You have a right to, and a responsibility. Borrow the car, bring it back. Fuller, cleaner, and in better condition than when you took it. Or you lose the right. So it's a philosophy. It's a value. And I think the most powerful way that you nurture it is what do kids see when they watch you? Do they see you living your values? Okay? I think there's 3 stages of building accountability in our lives. Number 1 is dependence. You cannot hold a baby accountable for anything. Why? Can't have it. By the way, kids are not born accountable. Have you noticed this? We have to learn how to be accountable. It's like a muscle that needs developing. So when babies are born, you can't hold them accountable. Why? Think about it. Why? Because they are completely dependent. People who are completely dependent cannot be held accountable for anything. And as they get older, that dependence needs to be transferred into independence. But we forget that independence is not yet accountability. There's 2 kinds of independence. One is what I call an adolescent independence, which is a defiant independence. The other independence is a sense of planting your own flag and saying, you know what, I can do it. and developing the self-reliance of being able to put their flag down, have a goal, have a dream, and make it. And this is why I always told family businesses, when I work with family businesses, get away from the family business for at least 5 years. Why? While you're in the independent stage. Why? Now, I won't say that I've never seen a family business successfully make a succession where kids stayed in the business. It has happened. But you have to be very intentional on creating an opportunity for independence. This is the antidote to entitlement. The sense of, I have to do it on my own. I've got to find a way to make this happen. Part of it might be going away to university, but you can go away to university and not be independent, especially if you get your way paid. I want you to go out, this is what I tell the second generation, I want you to go out and prove to yourself that you can make something in the world of yourself, for yourself. Get a sense of your own independence in this process. And then come back into the business with what? With something to add to the value to the business. Then we can talk about moving into a future partnership, because you've got something to bring the business from what you've developed independently. Now, I know I don't operate that way with a rule, but it's the principle of independence. You can't go from stage 1 into stage 3, which is you can depend on me. How many of you have ever met somebody in their 40s that have never gotten out of stage 1? See, if you've never really become independent, if you're just staying in the business for the sake of, well, there's nothing else to do and this is a great opportunity and yeah, mom and dad will allow room for me here, where's the independence in it? You will always have a sense of entitlement if you don't get past the independence. If you don't really live the stage of independence. You got to plant your goal in life, right? What I think it takes is fundamentally 2 skills to build accountability with people around us. Number 1, it takes support skills. Number 2, it takes demand skills. How many of you understand you can support and support and support and support and support, but that's not the only thing it takes. I go back to my mother. By the way, I think our generation, every generation here, every person here who was raised by parents during the Second World War, I'm going to suggest, had too much demand in their family and not enough support. I'm going to guess that with 90% accuracy. And so you know what we did? I think of my mother, who rode her horse to school in grade 1 for 6 miles. You've all heard stories, 6 miles uphill both ways. It was actually 6 miles across a railroad track. It was not uphill both ways, but it was 6 miles. Her dad worked 3 jobs to support 12 kids during the Depression, and she rode her horse to school. On her first day of school, she got strapped. What do you think happened? It's a one-room school, 12 grades in one room. What do you suppose happened to my mother when she got strapped? When she came home, what do you think happened? Do you think she came with welts on her hand and said to her dad, look at what happened to me? And do you think her dad got on a horse and said, I'm going in and talk to that teacher? Do you know something that happened to my mother? She never told anybody that she got strapped. It's called common sense. Who is accountable? She's responsible for that. My opinion is too much demand, not enough support. But is all that demand bad? Is it all bad? No, she learned to be self-reliant. She learned some independence. But I'll tell you, she didn't learn a lot about getting support. What happens, though, is that when you get kids, after you've had too much demand in your upbringing and not enough support, guess what we do as parents? We say this to our kids, or at least to ourselves. How many of you have ever said this? I'm not going to raise my kids the way I was raised. I'm going to give them what I didn't have. And we throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I think we've got a whole generation that we've gotten this out of balance. So very briefly, first of all, we have to make the connection. This is the support part. We have to make a connection. How do you know if you're making a connection? Do people feel safe to take risks? Do they feel joined with you? I begin to wonder in this technology world, these are great tools, these little computers. They're great tools for passing along information. You know what I think? They're lousy tools for connecting. They're lousy tools. And this is my generation talking, I know that. But even when I watch my expert teenagers, expert texters, they don't depend on texting for relationships. They have face-to-face relationships. The texting is just the keeping people in touch. It's not a matter of getting people in touch. It's a matter of keeping in touch. Connecting. It's the difference between being a father and being dad. What's the difference? Every person in this room had a father, but not all of us had dads. But you won't have the leverage to foster accountability without that degree of... This is where support comes. Support doesn't come from rescuing. Support comes from connecting. And the way you define connection is what? T-I-M-E. I don't believe in quality time. We have this world of, well, we're going to go and have quality time together. No. All you do is have time. That's all you do. You make time. Hopefully it's quality. I can tell you one of the people who was extremely influential in teaching me about accountability was one of our hired hands on our little farm. His name is Norris. Norris owned nothing in his life. He lived in a dirt shack, owned a bicycle and a couple of horses. And I said, Norris, how do you get so happy? He says, happiness, and this is another one of those 40-year voices. If I close my eyes today, I can still smell Norris. We worked so close. We built a barn together one summer. He taught me about pride, but he was invested in me. He taught me about the pride of workmanship. He taught me how to shake a hand. He said, you shake a hand like a fish. He says, if you're going to make anything of yourself in the world, you need to learn how to shake a hand. And he would take my hand and show me how to shake hands. I love that guy. I loved him. There's me fencing when I was 17. Somebody asked me the other day, why would you fence without a shirt on? This is a very good question. Norris was what I call a leg up person for me. Somebody comes along in your life and gives you a leg up, gives you more positive affirmation than they give negative criticism. He modeled accountability. As my dad would say, I don't think accountability can be taught, but it can be caught. And the way you catch it is to connect. So first question is, by the way, go back here, ask yourself, do people that in your life that you want to foster accountability with, do they need support or do they need to be pushed? Do they need to demand? And every day, parents, by the way, any parent that's been a parent longer than 2 days understands this. You got to keep asking the question every day. Do they need to be supported? You don't want to support them when they need to be pushed, but you also don't want to push them when they need to be supported. And we're never going to get it right, but we invest in the process, okay? The connection. I just share this slide. I was a competitive runner for 25 years. This just happens to be one of my heroes, but not the runner, the guy standing beside him. This is Derek Redmond, Sarajevo Games, 1992. Derek Redmond is a sprinter. In the first 150 meters, on the first leg of the 400 meters, he tore a hamstring. Who's standing beside him? His father. They can't understand to this day how his dad got through 7 security guards, got down on the track, and picked his son up and carried him 250 meters so he could finish the race of his life. And you know what I say? Where's his gold medal? And he didn't need any drugs, to do it. What are we doing to connect with the people that we care about? Yeah, it's easy to give. It's easy to give stuff. A lot harder to invest the time. Connect to people's authentic self. Here's a very important, critical factor in accountability. You got to get to your heart. The problem with most accountability processes is that they're very transactional. They're not transformational. And they don't have the passion. Every day you come to work, you bring your body with you, but do you bring your passion, your purpose, your unique talents, your values, your sweet spot? Do you find your gifts within your business? Your business is a tool to express your talents. And so much of what connecting is connecting people to their gifts and finding that sweet spot. When we did this research, I used to think you had to know something to write a book about it. You know what I discovered? If you want to learn something, write a book about it. So I keep writing, because I keep learning. And this came from our leadership book. When we asked people 10 years ago, when we started to do this research, we researched 4,000 employees. We asked them, what do you want from your leaders? Basically what we heard is we want our leaders to get past the fads, the gimmicks, and the flavors of the month. We just want our leaders to be real. So I started to write a book about real leadership. It turned from a real leadership book into a real personal book, because the premise is, if you want to be a great leader, be first of all a good person. And in that book, we just talk about finding your passion, your purpose, your unique abilities. Why do you get out of bed in the morning? Number one reason is that I hear is people to pee. Well, that's a good place to start. But you've got to have a purpose. You've got to have a vision. And if you can get to that, then you can get to accountability. Every entrepreneur, how many founders do we have in this room? Okay, when you found a business, you work on what? You do everything? What happens, sir, if you keep doing everything? What would happen to your business if you kept doing everything? You would grow, or as Dan Sullivan would say, you will reach a ceiling of complexity. It will grow for a while, and then it would plateau. You can work 24/7, and it will cave. How do you grow a business, an entrepreneurial venture? You find your sweet spot, and you delegate everything else. That's not an entrepreneurial challenge. That's a human challenge. Ask people where their sweet spot is. Connect. If you want to get people accountable, find out where their sweet spot is. How often have we ever had a performance review when we ask people, how's your sweet satisfaction here? When you're doing what you're meant to be doing, then you get into your sweet spot, okay? What I do is map your energy. I don't think it's about time management anymore. I think it's about energy management. So where's your energy expended? And young people have taught me this. Young people have changed the nature, because we didn't think about this. This is like short-term satisfaction and long-term fulfillment. And then you can track those. This is what we call stimulating. This is called sacrificing. By the way, this is my dad. 40 years in a job. He hated. Why? So he could pay for our education. I never want to take that for granted. Never want to take that for granted. But our young people today have looked at that and they've said, what? I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to work like that anymore. I don't want to sacrifice myself. So they've made our workplaces better by saying, hey, we need to be a little stimulating. But this is where the two generations that was talked about here, this is where we can mentor each other through connection, through finding out what our passion is, what gives us meaning. Personally, I think that what a great job is not up here. A great job is a balance between those four things. Nobody in this room doesn't understand how many times you just have to roll your sleeves up and get the bloody job done. It's called sacrificing. Or it may be slogging. There's slogging in every job. I got to meet with of course I have a very engaging accountant, but I got to meet with my accountant. It's slogging every year. So we make it, I make it engaging, right? I got an accountant. In fact, my wife, who does all our bookkeeping, has to bring me back and say, come on, let's stay on topic, because we get off on all kinds of tangents, because I got to make it meaningful. But there's stuff, we all slog. But this is where I don't think we mind the slogging if a part of our work is in our sweet spot. And by the way, if there's balance here, there'll be accountability. And then finally, first of all, you got to fit people. Don't fix people. Fit people. Where do you fit here? And don't try to, just because it's your daughter or son, don't feel as though you have to fit. Maybe they may not fit here in this place. I would love to hear what Hillary has to say about all this when we have a talk after that. So, bottom line is, if you want engagement, commitment, loyalty, accountability, you have to integrate accountability with authenticity. And this is the problem with most accountability programs, is that we talk about the accountability, but they're not integrated with authenticity. Accountability without connection is compliance. Accountability without passion is drudgery. Accountability with authenticity is destiny. This is the work that we do around this. All right. Then you also have to do the push part, the demand part. And so what we do is that we design, this is our accountability process. I don't know what process for managing expectations you use. This is the process that we've developed now over 25 years of observations. And basically it comes down to 5 things. 5 key elements in any accountability process. First of all is a contribution statement. That gets to your authentic self. What do I want to contribute here? What are my gifts? What are my strengths? What's my passion? By the way, 2 pages max. Number 2, what are the promises? What do you promise to achieve? Number 3, this gets a little transactional, so it's not the stimulating part of my conversation, but this is the practical part. What supports do you need? By the way, take a look at your current process for managing expectations and ask yourself, where are there gaps? How well do people sit down and say, if this is what I'm going to promise, this is what I need for support. Every promise needs a support requirement statement beside it so that we foster that together. What will be the consequences? And I always start with positive consequences, but without consequences, there can be no accountability. And then finally, how often do we need to talk so we keep this document alive and fresh and engaging? It's a 2-page document. Now, I have all kinds of examples in my book. This is my favorite one. I mean, we use accountability agreements with everybody we have a long-term agreement with. I've had an accountability agreement with my kids' teachers. I've had an accountability, every time my kid wants, any one of my daughters wants something, in a pet, for example, they have to write an accountability agreement. Right? This is what I need for support, this is what I'm going to promise, this is what will be the consequences. We write it up, put it on the fridge, we have an agreement. This is my favorite agreement in the book. This is written by my 18-year-old. When she was 18, she went for a job interview, summer job interview. Here's her contribution. I intend to add value and contribute to the profitability of your company. By the way, we now teach accountability agreements to university students. So when you go in for a job interview, they don't want to just know your resume. They want to know what you're going to be accountable for. What value are you going to bring them? Bring that with you. That will mean more. That will mean much more to an employer than what you have to say on your resume. I mean, you got to have the resume. WestJet takes 10 hours to hire somebody. What are they looking for? Is this person going to fit the culture here? Contribution statement. I intend to add value and contribution to the profitability of your company. I'm personally committed to bring a positive, self-responsible attitude to my work. Accountabilities. I'm personally accountable for being on time for work every day, for bringing a positive attitude to my work, to fulfill my accountabilities, to be eager to learn and enhance my skills, to work in a cooperative manner with all employees, to serve the customer to the best of my ability, to being a hardworking, reliable, honest employee, to being creative and self-motivated, to work late when needed to achieve my accountabilities. Then she had some ways of measuring that. Her support requirements. I need you to trust me even though I realize I have to earn that trust. I want you to be willing to give me feedback as much as possible. I want you to be patient with me as I have a lot to learn and will make mistakes every once in a while. Consequences. I take personal satisfaction in knowing I'm doing a job to the best of my ability, and my raises should be conditional on the value that I bring to your organization. She got a job in 5 minutes. 5 minutes later, I got a call from her boss. Says, would you come and talk to our company about accountability agreements? So it's one of the proud moments of my life to see my kids kind of take these tools that they've learned in our business. And I'm now relating this whole succession because I now have a 20-year-old daughter who's interested in working with me and teaching. And I said, you know what? Got to do your thing first. Got nothing to value of, you got passion, I understand. You got energy, but you need to develop your own skills first. Find your own way so you're not my daughter. You come in and find your own name in the marketplace. Then let's talk. And in the meantime, you can work in our business over the summer. You can work with us part-time. But we'll consider partnership only after you get your independence. This is George Bernard Shaw. 93 years old. Founder of the London School of Economics. Irish philosopher and playwright. This is the true joy of life. The being used for a purpose. Recognized by yourself as a mighty one. The being a force of nature instead of a feverish little selfish clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I think my dad would have liked George Bernard Shaw. It's the law of the echo. You know what the law of the echo is? Whatever you give out into the world will what? Will come back tenfold. You want more accountability in your family? What must you do? Bring more accountability to your family. Whatever you want, give. You want more love in a relationship? Bring more love to that relationship. Okay? Bottom line, law of the echo is inspire people by being accountable. It's inspiring to be around accountable people. Take ownership. See all blame as a waste of time, including blaming people who aren't accountable. Because unaccountable people will suck you in to negativity, right? Your life will change forever the day that you decide that you're no longer going to blame anybody. Number 2, think carefully before you make a promise. Never make a promise that you're not prepared to keep. This is just fundamental 101 accountability. But you know what? I get surprised today when a retail store actually keeps a promise. We have become, not because we're unethical, we're just lazy. We have this so good. Franco said this, we have it so good in this country. We're all entitled. So we had furniture delivered out to our Cochrane home last year. The furniture company said it'll be there 9 o'clock Wednesday morning. We kind of rolled our eyes, yeah, right. We don't expect it. It'll get there kind of sometime. 10 to 9, I get a call from the truck driver. Said, I'm just around the corner, just want to make sure I'm in the neighborhood. I'm 5 minutes away from your house. Want to make sure I got the right address. My wife and I looked at each other and said, wow, why is it that keeping a promise wows you anymore? Because so few of us do it anymore. Just be really, really mindful when you make a promise. Am I going to keep this promise? By the way, a request is not an agreement. It's when you make an agreement, keep it. Scrupulously honor your promises and let go of your desire to make everybody happy. Okay. By the way, let me just ask you very quickly. If you were to ask your parents, let me just ask you, your 3 goals for your kids, those of you who are parents or thinking about being a parent, what would your 3 goals be for your kids? Think about it. How many, if you're honest with yourself, would have happiness is one of those goals? I want my kids to be happy. Now let me ask you this. Franco touched on this. I asked my mother once, while I was teaching this material on raising accountable kids, I said, what are your 3 goals for us? Do you think happiness was in her goals? No. She said, I want you to learn to work hard. I want you to be compassionate. And I want you to learn how to respect people. And if you do those 3 things, you will what? You will be happy. But it's not my job to make you happy. Think about that. Okay? Anyway, thanks for your time.